February 22nd, 2001. My name is Jerome Perry, along with my cameraman Alan Eggers. We're going to do an oral interview with Don Williams at 1522 B Avenue Northwest. Don had, in his lifetime, worked at Hunter Airport, and he will give us some history on it. Can you tell us, Don, where you were born? And
I was born in a place called Jordan's Grove, near Wabeek, in Iowa. I was born in 1920. My dad was a hired man on this farm, and I was born during the time that he worked there.
That was just north of Central City, wasn't it?
Yes. And my folks left there. I guess I was probably a year or two old. They never stayed. They moved to Cedar Rapids, and my dad was employed here at a bakery. And I went to school here in Cedar Rapids, Roosevelt School, and I left school at a kind of an early age and went to work. Some of the jobs I've had, I was a machinist at Collins Radio for a short time. Then I went to work for another man, Paul Lebeda, at he did contract work for Collins Radio. And then I operated a gas station for 2 or 3 years, and I didn't like that too well, so from then I went to work for the school system. I worked for them for 25 years as an audiovisual repairman. And that was the job I liked the best. But when I was younger, I worked at Hunter Airport during the time that they were flying Air Force students. And that was a nice job. I enjoyed that very much.
Was these students, were these students taking training on their own, or were they through college? Or?
They were regular Air Force students. The Air Force had a man or two there to oversee the program, and but all the personnel were civilians, and the instructors were older type men that were too old for military service, and they were hired as instructors. The airplanes we used was this type of airplane. Cubs and Arankas. Yeah, I'm lost there.
Well, were these students you're talking about, did they also go to Coe College at the time, or were they just strictly training for?
They were housed at Coe College.
They were housed at Coe College.
Yes, and they were bused over to the field in school buses. And we had some 30 airplanes we had to maintain and keep going, ready for flight every day. Some of the starting problems, there was no starters in those airplanes, and you had to hand crank them, which wasn't a problem in the summertime, of course, but in the wintertime it got to be a problem when the weather got down below zero. And we'd put hoods over the airplanes and the heaters under them to warm up the engine so we could start them. Take the plugs out of some of them and warm them up, maybe shoot a little prime in the cylinders. All these airplanes had 65 horse engines in them, Continental engines and Lycomings, and we had to overhaul them at certain periods. I think 500 hours you had to give them a major overhaul. And they were overhauled in the shop. Charles Sheets was the chief mechanic. And after they were overhauled, they were mounted on a test stand and run for 3 or 4 hours. And then they were mounted in the airplane. And an instructor would get in there and a mechanic take it up and put another hour air time on it to make sure it was okay. And that's where I learned to fly. I used to, every chance I had, I would jump in the front seat and take off and get my instructions that way. And that's how I learned to fly. It was one of the perks of the job, I guess you might say.
And I imagine you took every opportunity to
Every
fly.
time I could, yes. If I could get away, I was in the front seat. We had to give the aircraft inspections every so often, and a lot of the problems we had in those days, they were fabric covered, and the runways were gravel, and they would pick up rocks, and poke little holes here and there, and we had to patch them. And we had to cover some of them and paint them, and there was a lot of that going on. That took up a lot of time. Some days when the weather was bad, we couldn't fly, like a fog or rain or something like that. And what the pilots did on those days to pass the time, they would go down in the lower hangar there and play poker and shoot craps down in the lower hangar. But of course we had work to do. We couldn't get in on any of that. And some of the humorous things that happened, one day we were working away and a formation of airplanes come flying over, this type here.
What type is this?
That's a PT-17, a Boeing Stearman, and it's a primary trainer. And they circled the field and a couple times, and all of a sudden they, one at a time, peeled off and dove down on us and made a mock air raid out of the situation. And that went on for about 5 or 10 minutes, and the Army inspector come running out of the office with his pad and pencil, and he says, get their numbers. And well, I was under the gas truck at that time, enjoying the show, so I wasn't about to get any numbers. And that happened on one occasion, but kind of relieved the monotony a little bit. And that same inspector, we found out one time that he liked to have a picnic in the summertime at night out in the field. So we got wind of that, and one night when him and his companion were out there having this picnic, we throwed on the floodlights on the field. And, well, there was quite some scrambling went on there for a little bit. And, well, the perpetrators were never found. Nobody knew anything, and that was never done anything about it. Another time, one winter, the student and the instructor were up doing their maneuvers, and the gas tank on this airplane was located right above the cabin. Well, down in the cabin was a plastic tube about 4 or 5 inches long, and on the other end, of course, was a float up in the tank. And when that tank went down, of course, the marker would go down and show you how much gas you had. So this particular day, it was in the winter, and somehow that tube got broke off in the airplane. And the gas, of course, started pouring down in the cockpit, or the cabin. And the student right away stuck his finger up in that tube to shut off the flow. They had to do something. And they flew back, and his finger was really froze when they landed. I don't know how it come out, I never heard, but he had one cold finger, I'll tell you. And sometimes a student would lose his breakfast, sometime, and he would kind of throw up in the airplane, and when they landed, we give him a bucket of water and a sponge and said, "Brother, you did it, you clean it up." But after a bit, they started putting bags in there to kind of prevent that. Might take a little break, maybe.
Yes.
Go.
Okay.
I'd like to give a brief description of the airport as it was when I worked there in 1942. There was a main hangar, a metal main hangar, right on kind of on the corner, on the southeast corner. There were 3 runways. We had a northwest, southeast runway, a north-south, and then we had an east-west. The north, the west, southeast was the longest runway. To the right, north of the hangar, was the machine shop and the engine overhaul shop. And in the rear of that was the welding shop. The hangar, to me, looked like it had had a fire before. You could see evidence in the girders were kind of twisted, but it was still standing in good shape. Right next to it, on the south side, was a administration building, I call it, where the offices were, and where they did their bookwork and everything. And then west of that, down the line away, was a smaller hangar. We always referred to it as the lower hangar. And that's where we did the aircraft work, like covering and painting and so forth down there. The flight lines were run east and west. There was 2 flight lines we had. Of course, there wasn't room in the hangars for all the airplanes, so we had to tie a lot of them out, and kind of hope that we never had any hail or anything like that, but which never occurred at the time I was there. And of course, the runways were gravel, and that's about all I can tell you about the airport.
You were talking about starting these airplanes.
Yes.
In weather like this, when it was cold and your airplanes were parked outside, wasn't that quite a chore to get those things fired up?
Oh, yeah.
Did they have ether they had to shoot in them?
Well, yeah, we shot in a whiff of ether and tried to do it that way, but heating them with a heater was usually the best way, because it heated up the oil in them, and you could turn them over, by hand. You had to do it by hand.
Did you try to have these running and warmed up by the time the students
Yes.
got there?
Yeah, I spent many long hours at that field, even in the evening, and did things to kind of get ready for the next day. And
When did they try to do their instructions, in the morning or in the evening?
they had 2 flights daily, one in the morning and one in the afternoon. That's when they did their instruction. Other than that, I think they did all their groundwork over at Coe College.
Did you know Dan Hunter?
Oh yes, I know Dan Hunter.
How old do you suppose? How old were you at that time?
Well, I was 21.
21, and Dan would have been what, in the 40s, something?
And maybe close to 50. In the upper 40s, I would say.
Now, you were working for Dan?
Yes.
Did he hire you?
No, he didn't hire me. A man by Leo Damsey hired me. He was one of the officials at the airport.
What sort of a man was Dan? Was he
A wonderful man.
Was he?
Very nice fellow.
Treated you very well?
Oh, yes. He was a very nice man. He had another field in Texas that he was operating at the same time. And he used to fly back and forth, and he'd come in unannounced, and how's things going and everything. I liked him. He was a very nice fellow.
Do you remember any of your fellow workers or the
Yes.
people that...
Yes. The mechanics, some of the mechanics, I can remember 2 or 3 of them. Earl Tolson was a good friend of mine. There was a mechanic called Pop, we call him Pop Buis, real short fella. And him and I rigged a Travel Air one time, assembled it and rigged it, and him and I took care of that little job. Of course, Charles Sheets was the chief mechanic. Kermit Jonesburg was one of the oldest pilots there. I believe Kermit was around 70 years old. And still he could give instructions, and he did real well. But I think I was around the youngest person there at the time. And the program ran for some 2 years before it was phased out. And we had to stay a little while after that, and we had to restore those airplanes to their condition they were when they were borrowed from their owners. And that took a little time to do that.
Explain that, borrowed from their owners.
Well, they were
Privately owned planes?
privately owned planes, and the government said, we need those planes, and they took them. I don't think anybody complained because they were promised to be returned in the condition they were when they were borrowed. Now, I don't know if money changed hands there or not. I had no knowledge of that. Maybe there was some payment made for the use of those airplanes, but that's the way it was done.
Were they pretty much all the same type of airplane?
Yes. They were the light plane variety, such as this here, Piper Cub and Aroncas, and that's the kind they were, but they were suitable for primary training, you know. It kind of filled a need till the war machinery could get going and produce enough of this type of airplane to take the place, and it was a very needed program at the time.
Yeah, I was asking you about some of your fellow workers. I forgot to ask you, do you remember any Watham that worked there at that time? Am I pronouncing that right?
Jim?
Jim Watham.
Oh, yeah.
Did he work there at that time?
He was the chief pilot, and of course later on Jim started the Watham plane service out at the municipal airport. But that was the same man, a very nice man. And Jim was nice to work for. I liked him.
Well, being these were students that were being instructed, did they have any serious accidents or any?
Yes, we had one serious accident during that time. Two of our airplanes, they had sectors they were supposed to fly in, take off and do their testing and maneuvers in these different sectors. But somehow they must have got together and got in the wrong areas, and they collided. From what I could get of the accident, I think the airplane probably it happened this way, that this airplane come down and hit this wing, and he lost his one landing gear. He was able to fly back, and with some help he landed safely, and it didn't hurt the airplane other than that. But this plane here lost this wing from here out, and of course he was, he couldn't do anything. He spun in and crashed, and the student and instructor both were killed. That was the worst accident we had. We had a couple airplanes landed in a forced landing. We had to go over and check them out and fix whatever happened to their engines, and they were able to fly them out of there. We've had a few phone calls. Of course, during the war, anything went, And we got a few phone calls at the field from farmers that were out plowing, and our planes would dive on them and dust them off a little bit, and that made them kind of mad. And they would call over and complain a little bit, but there again, nobody knew anything about it. They didn't know who did it or anything. But that happened along with everything else.
I had a question, Don. You're talking about these mechanics. Would they, at that time, had to have been certified
Oh,
by the
yes.
FAA back then?
Oh, yes, they had
Was
to.
there such a? There would have been an FAA.
Yes, yes, there was an FAA inspector in the field at all times, really. When these students received, they received 4 hours of dual instruction. Well, then after that, they were given a check ride. And if they passed, they went on and advanced to more faster and airplanes. And I don't know the ones that flunked out what they did with those. I suppose they give them other jobs, but they had to pass the test when 4 hours was completed. And now let's see. The city used to put on bond drives and try to persuade you to buy war bonds to help the war effort. Well, during those occasions, there was a Navy training base over in Ottumwa, and they used to fly over and give a little demonstration to the crowd during those bond drives. So one time, 7 of them come over, and they landed at the Hunters there, and were waiting for time to go and do their thing. And every one of them had a pilot in there except one, and there was one mechanic in there. And they landed and waited, and pretty soon it was time to take off. Well, he went around and started all those airplanes. Well, they had to put a crank in the side of this engine, and it had an inertia starter, and it took a little beef to get it going. And he went around and started all of those airplanes. Stowed the crank in the last one, hit the button, and it went, and he come around and reached in the back cockpit to get his parachute. And he was buckling it on, and all of a sudden, them guys took off in a cloud of dust and left him standing with his parachute half on and half out, shaking his fist. He was quite a mad person. But later on, they landed, and one of them landed and picked him up, and by that time he had cooled off, and they took him back. So that's one of the things that happened there. And
one of the requirements when you flew or anybody flew, was it a law that they had to have a parachute on them, or?
We used parachutes, yeah. I don't know if it was a law, but we all used parachutes. The mechanics were all licensed they called A&E mechanic. You had to have a license, to work on airplanes and engines and so forth. But I was studying for mine at the time, but I never had one. But whatever work I did was signed by another licensed person that overseen the work and everything. So that's the way that happened. When I left Hunters after it was all over, I moved to Chicago, and I worked in a place where they overhauled aircraft engines like that, the big radials. And I worked there for a couple of years in that place. In fact, it was just started up when I went to work there.
When you worked at Hunter Airport, did any, they called them a Ford Tri-Motor, did they ever come into the airport?
Not while I was there. My wife said, I don't remember it, but she said there was a DC-3 or a C-47, which is a twin-engine paratroop type plane that landed there one time. But that Ford Tri-Motor, I know the one you're talking about, used to come back to the field every now and then and would give rides. You could buy a ride on that airplane, and I took a ride in it one time. It was quite an interesting airplane. Big, and old. It was old. It was covered in with corrugated aluminum. That was the covering.
Did you ever consider getting a pilot license?
Well, I did, but money. It took a little money, you know, to take the training and so forth. And I thought about it, but I just never got around to it. After I retired, I thought about, her and I talked about taking a little more instruction and see if I could get my license, but then my eyes started going bad, and of course it was out of the question then. You got to have a good pair of eyes to get a pilot's license. One evening after work, things were kind of running down, and a gentleman called Butch Hunter and myself decided that we were going to, he was a pilot, of course, but we were going to take up one of the mechanics owned a monocoop. This wasn't a government airplane. This was a personal airplane. So we hopped in this airplane and took off. And we got up in the air, and I said to Butch, I says, let's fly over my house and buzz it a couple times and see and wake up my wife. So we lived in Westwood at that time, and we flew out there, and I located my house, and we gave her a good going over, and my wife come running out of the house, and my grandmother was there at the time. And my wife said that Grandma about had a heart attack when this was going on. And we decided we'd make one more pass, you know, which was one too many. And there was a dead limb on the tree, a big oak tree there. And as we dove down on the house, we didn't see that limb. And that limb hit the airplane under the wing here and tore a big hole in that wing, which was fortunate. That's all it did. So we flew back to the field, I'll tell you right now, and we landed, and we was assessing the damage on that airplane, you know, and thinking, well, we got to get this fixed. And a car whipped into the field and come running up, and Jim Waltham jumped out, and he said, what in the world's going on out here? He said, I've got 3 phone calls from people out in Westwood. There's an airplane out there just raising the devil, and I wonder what's going on. And he says, what happened to that airplane there? And we said, well, we backed into it with a gas truck, tore a hole in it. So I think the fact that Butch Hunter was involved kind of saved me on that one, because there wasn't anything done at the time.
You don't recall Butch's real name, do you?
No, I don't. We all called him Butch. I never heard it. It's too bad I don't, but he was Dan's nephew. Of course, his dad must have been related to Dan, must have been a brother to Dan. That had to be the way.
And this was during the war years when you worked out there. Was there such a thing as any security at the airport? Did they have guards out there? Or?
Not in the daytime. At night there was 2 guards that guarded at night, but there wasn't any done in the daytime. Hunter was a typical small airport, you know.
Where did you eat? Did you have to take your lunch, or was there
Well,
any place
no,
around there?
they served lunch to the personnel at the inn over on the corner. One time I had to stay over. One of the guards never showed up, so I stayed over and took over his job that night. And during the night, I went over to the inn to get a cup of coffee. I got kind of sleepy. I thought it'd kind of help me get awake. And I opened the door and walked in and turned the lights on, and boy, the walls moved. I'll tell you, there was roaches having a feast over there. And it kind of shook me up a little bit. I thought, here, I eat over here every day, and I never seen a one while I was eating. So that was one thing that happened there.
You mentioned this was in the evening. Did you ever do any night duty? Did you have to work late into the night, or
Yeah.
was your hours pretty much set?
Well, they were set, but there was occasions when we had to work a little late.
Was there any activity at the airport itself at night? Would planes come in and land or take off at
No.
night?
No, it was never maintained. Even at night, I mean during peacetime, I don't think it was. It was a typical small airport. There wasn't much there really.
Did you ever hear of Saxton's Airport
Oh yeah,
out by where the Rockwall
yeah.
C Avenue and Blair's Ferry is?
I landed there one time. A friend of mine owned an airplane, Ray Orr, and he owned a 182 Cessna, and we used to take rides in that. And we landed over at Saxon one time a couple years ago, and we landed out at Marion Airport, McBride Airport, and we used to fly down to Montezuma and landed at the model airplane factory down there. We used to fly down there. I used to build radio-controlled models, large ones, and we'd go down there occasionally and pick up our supplies and parts, Ray and I.
Was this I assume that this was your hobby for quite a few years,
Yes.
model airplanes.
Yes. Yeah, I done that till my eyes started going bad and I couldn't see them well enough. We built some big ones, and we had a lot of fun. We called our club the Cedar Rapids Skyhawks, and there was about 15 or 20 members.
That is still an active club, isn't
I think it is, yeah. We had a field out by Norway that we rented from a farmer, and we flew out there and kept it mowed and everything. It was quite a lot of fun. I had many enjoyable hours. Of course, we'd crash one now and then, but we'd always build another one.
Pick up and explain about the program itself.
Yeah, this program lasted for a little over 2 years, and it was called the War Training Service. Hunter Airport was one of the airports that was chosen for this program. I was there during the entire time, and I enjoyed my work very much. I would do it again if I had the chance. And I learned to fly, and we provided a need that was the government needed at the time till they could catch up with their war effort.
After this was over, or after you left Hunter Airport, Don, what did you do later in life then?
Well, I went to work in Chicago at a engine overhaul place, and I worked Aircraft engines, yeah. We overhauled type like that, radio engines. And then I lived in Steger. Her and I were married at the time. And
Speaking of being married, Don, can we bring your wife into the picture at this
Why,
time?
yes. Mm-hmm. Come on, Ev.
Pull the chair over by him.
Where do you want me?
Where you want? Is this okay?
Yeah, just lean over him. That'll be
Yeah,
fine.
yeah.
I'd like you to meet my wife, Evelyn. We've been married 64 years. We met in high school, and we were married right out of high school. And I'm proud to say that she's my good-looking wife.
I understand, Evelyn, that you worked at the History Center as we do.
Yes, I did when I was over on 8th Avenue. Alberta Craig got me started there. I spent many evenings and some days down there too, and I really enjoyed it. And my health won't let me do it anymore.
Well, we appreciate all the volunteer work you did down there. Everybody did.
This has been a very pleasant and very interesting interview, and we want to thank you for allowing us to come into your home and documenting this history. We want to thank you very much. Did you have anything else there, Don?
No,
that
I
you'd
guess
like to mention?
I'll probably think of something after you leave, but right now I can't. And Well, I want to say I enjoyed it myself. So
Thank you very much.